Dr. Rae, I would like to spend our remaining few minutes talking about euthanasia and physical assisted suicide. Would you please explain what these terms mean and what is the difference between them?
Euthanasia simply means, it's the umbrella term. It's from two Greek words which mean good death. And I would actually distinguish between, there's three different things I would distinguish. One is the termination of life support, which in many cases is completely ethical to do, where in essence you are allowing disease to take its natural course, absent any further medical interventions. Physician-assisted suicide is where the patient enlists the assistance of a doctor to take his or her own life. The physician prescribes, instructs, and supervises the patient when he or she ingests the medicine himself or herself. Euthanasia generally occurs when the patient's too sick or debilitated to take his or her own life himself or herself. And so the physician actually administers the lethal dose of medication in case of euthanasia. In the U.S., and I think most of Europe, euthanasia is still illegal. Physician-assisted suicide is legal in a handful of states in the U.S. and places like Belgium, the Netherlands, parts of Scandinavia. Not sure. I don't think it's legal in most parts of Eastern Europe.
Yeah, that's right.
But whether that is preventing people from practicing or not is another question. Because in the Netherlands, for example, it was widely practiced for many years before the law was formally changed. And in today, in parts of Europe, we're seeing, children as young as 12 given the option of euthanasia to make that choice for themselves. Newborns, seriously ill newborns are being euthanized much more regularly. And the discussion in Europe is being more explicit about the economic costs of taking care of people at the end of life. It's sort of under the adage that there's nothing cheaper than dead. Considering euthanasia as legalizing it as part of the answer to holding down the costs, caring for this increasing numbers of elderly we're going to have in the next 20 years or so. Lots of places in the U.S. where it's still illegal. But it became legal in Australia not that long ago. But there's still, I think, a significant debate about it in lots of parts of the world. Western Europe, probably it's become a much more accepted thing.
So between those three, termination of life support, you said, and then euthanasia and physical assisted suicide, only the termination of life support will be argued to have a Christian ethic, but it will be analyzed case by case, as you seems to say. Yeah.
Under the right conditions. I mean, if you, God forbid, if you had a heart attack while we're speaking here, I would never say, well, let's just, withhold life support and allow, the disease to take its natural course. Because your prognosis would be excellent, and of course we should intervene. Where I think it's acceptable is where further treatment is futile, or whether it's more burdensome than beneficial. And in many cases, people at the end of life where they're seriously ill, they are sustained on treatments that they actually don't want, but that their family members continue to authorize because the family members, understandably, don't want to let go of them.
Yeah.
And so that puts the patient, I think, in a not a very good place.
Yeah.
Because they're lingering on in a state that they don't want. They'd rather go home and be with the Lord. And essentially, hospitals are providing medical treatments for the family's benefit, not the patient's. And that I think is almost always unethical to do that.
You also say that on this particular issue, you seem to say that the Christian must have the biblical view of death to properly understand this issue. Could you explain what's a biblical view of death?
Yeah, there's two parts to it. Death is not what God originally designed, but as a result of the cross and resurrection of Jesus, death is a conquered enemy, and therefore it need not always be resisted. It can never be directly caused in physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia, but it need not always be resisted if treatments are futile or more burdensome than beneficial. I don't want us to be in a theological position of saying that earthly life is the highest good, which it's not. And if we say that we're obligated to keep people alive at all times, all costs, no matter what, we're essentially affirming that earthly life is the highest good.
Well, we would say that there is an eternal life that's the highest.
Right. Our eternal fellowship with God is our highest good. Now, earthly life matters a lot. It's important, but it's not the very highest thing. So, again, under the right conditions, it's okay to say, stop the medicine. And in essence, we're turning that person back over to the Lord. When we make that decision to stop treatments.
So, in that sense, that could be a good death. Would you argue for that?
Yes, that would be the goal. It doesn't always happen that way, but that's certainly the intent. And so, to have people in hospice care, for example, or in a place where the only treatment they receive is to alleviate their pain, that can be a moral option.
Let's conclude with one last question. When ethicists discuss the topics of euthanasia and abortion, a principle that is repeatedly brought up is the sanctity of life. What do the ethicists mean by this principle, and how does it influence the way these issues are solved?
Yeah, that's a great question, because the sanctity of life has been interpreted in a lot of different ways. What I mean by that is that human life has an intrinsic value simply because we are members of the human species. We have as a result, we have the right to life, and we have rights over our own bodies to make decisions about what happens to us. But most of it revolves around having the right to life. And therefore, anything that directly causes the death of another innocent person is morally wrong. So it would involve the idea that human beings have an essential intrinsic dignity to them by virtue of being made in the image of God, regardless of our ability to function.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rae. It has been a great pleasure to talk to you today.
And great to be with you. And to all your listeners in Albania, all God's best to you.